And this is covering our, I had to change the word, because I can't say child and youth abuse without tripping over my tongue. So it's Youth and Child Abuse Prevention Program. That will get changed. So who is included in the Youth and Children Program? It's included but not limited to the youth group, high school, middle school, both of those youth groups, study groups on Sunday mornings, mission trips that you'll be on with minors, children's church, nursery, any summer programming like sports camp or special lunch events after sports camp. We are having a post-game party. So that's specifically targeting the family and the kids that are coming to sports camp, and other special programs such as the Christmas/Easter play that we did this year. So anything that's working with a minor, 17 or under, okay, is a youth program. I'm going to take this form that you have and we're going to read through a lot, just so that I know that you've read it and heard it, okay? So in the introduction it says, why do we have this? It's to help protect children. The church has adopted the following child and youth abuse prevention program. It's important that all church paid staff and volunteers understand and implement these guidelines to help prevent sexual abuse against children. The following includes the purposes and definitions for these guidelines, the outlines of protection and prevention, and an acknowledgement from you who have been here and listening that will be signed saying that you're in agreement with what we talk about today. So if you have any questions, concerns, something you don't agree with, now would be the time to talk and discuss that so that we can make sure that we're all on the same page as to why we are doing these things. So the purpose. The procedures are designed to reduce the risk of child sexual abuse in order to, one, provide a safe and secure environment for children, youth, adults, members, volunteers, visitors, and paid staff. One thing I know as a mom, when I was coming to look for churches, the number one thing, because my kids were young, was, did I feel safe dropping them off at the nursery? Did I feel safe putting them in the study group? And that's key for bringing in new families, is that we're making them not only teaching them the Word of God, but making sure that they feel safe when they come here and drop their kids off. To assist the church in evaluating a person's suitability to supervise, oversee, and/or exert control over the activities of children and youth. So we can exert control in many different ways. If you're the worship leader like Jesse is, you exert control in that you're trying to bring the children into the worship of God. If you're working in the kitchen, you have a degree of control over the kids because you're serving them food, you're allowing them to take something, not take something, asking them to clean up, throw things away. That's a way that we have control over the children besides just direct teaching. To satisfy the concerns of parents and staff members with a screening process for paid staff and volunteers, to provide a system to respond to alleged victims of sexual abuse and their families, as well as the alleged perpetrator, and to reduce the possibility of false accusations of sexual abuse made against volunteers and paid staff. And I really want to emphasize the point that this is not just for the protection of the children, but also for everyone sitting in this room. Starting this week, for children's ministry, whether you're in children's church, nursery already has this where you're supposed to sign in when you're working, but even in the Sunday school, the volunteers will be signing in. Because the number one way to protect you is if someone would have let's say, I'm going to pick on Jesse because he's sitting right here in front of me. So let's say somebody says, Jesse hurt my child on May 28th. The first thing I'm going to do is go back to my file and say, was Jesse even working on May 28th? And if Jesse wasn't working on May 28th, I get to dismiss that. We're done. And it's the easiest way to protect you and to make sure that we can address the concerns. Now, if Jesse was working that day, then we would have to take it to the next steps of looking into it. So, this will be a new habit to get into as a church family, but I hope that everyone can remember to use those sign-in sheets when you're working with the kids. Okay, definitions.
I have a question.
Yes.
Where will this sign-in process take place? Where will it be? How is
Good
that going to be
question.
implemented?
Good question. In the Sunday school classroom, we start off in a large group atmosphere, so the teachers will sign in on the table right there in the large group atmosphere. For the children's church, there's a bulletin board, and it will be stuck on the bulletin board. And in the nursery, where the children sign in, and the parents sign the kids in, right there at the top, the volunteers are supposed to be signing that form for that day. So all three areas. John will maybe do something for the youth group workers, but, yeah, so that's how we'll work in those three areas. And then when it comes to sports camp, we'll have the registration person marking off who's here. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Okay, definitions. The following terms are used and defined as follows. Paid staff is any pastor, office staff, or employee who is paid. Children, youth, or minor, any person who has not reached his or her 18th birthday or the age of majority as defined by state law. Adult, any person who has reached his or her 18th birthday or as defined by state law. A volunteer means any unpaid person engaged in or involved in activities and who is entrusted with the care and supervision of minors, or a person who directly oversees and/or exerts control or oversight over minors and or adults. And that is where most of you fall in. Remember that whenever you're interacting with a minor in a church-sponsored event, you are entrusted with the care of that child from the parent. You're the parent, you're the extension, you're the arm of the parent. So it's important to know that. But what I do want to also clarify is that it doesn't relate to children who remain in the building with their parents after we've been excused from our church event. So if we have a potluck after a church event, it's not our responsibility at that point that we are exerting that control, because they're supposed to be with their parent or guardian at that time. So we're no longer responsible for what's happening in a direct way. In an indirect way, as a church family, we should always be looking out for our children. And we help each other because that's what we do. But that's not considered one of our programming tasks. Okay, sexual abuse. And this is a pretty lengthy definition, but we need to go through what is sexual abuse. The employment, use, persuasion, inducement, enticement, or coercion of any minor or adult to engage in or assist any other person to engage in any sexually explicit conduct or simulation of such conduct for the purpose of producing any visual depiction of such conduct or rape, and in cases of caretaker or interfamilial relationships, statutory rape, molestation, prostitution, or other forms of sexual exploitation of minor or adult, or incest with minor or adult, or as defined by federal and state law. This includes and is not limited to unwelcome sexual remarks, jokes, advancements, leering, whistling, or sexual gestures, touching, fondling, molestation, assault, or other intimate physical contact, compelling another person to engage in a sexual act by threats or fear of undue influence, and providing or displaying pornographic materials to another person. Pretty self-explanatory, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Child emotional abuse, verbal or nonverbal conduct, including mental exploitation and degrading communication. And this is degrading communication I really want to talk to with our high school and middle school youth, because this is something that it can be very common when you're with friends or out and about that you might say what's not considered to you a swear word. You might say the SH word, or you might say something, but when you're working with someone who's younger than you have to remember that that's not okay. So we don't use any words that can seem harmful, that you wouldn't want repeated. You wouldn't want a toddler to repeat to their parent. Even if you're working with an elementary age student, you just don't want those words coming out of your mouth. Okay, going on with that, it's humiliating, which can be teasing. Some kids are very sensitive to teasing, and we have to remember that as adults too. I tend to be a teaser, and that can be very hard for me at times to remember that, not everybody responds to that well and they take it to heart. So it's just something to keep in mind, to know the child that you're interacting with and know whether or not they have the ability to take that as for what it is and that we're not hurting their feelings. Or the threatening conduct that may or may not include bullying as defined by state law. And I just wanted to share with you that my life verse is Ephesians 4:29. And that states that, do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. And I was raised in a family where swearing was common, where teasing was common. And when I read this, for me, it really radically changed who I was. I'm like, not supposed to do that. So when we're working with kids, this is the verse I'd really like you to be thinking about. That it's uplifting talk, that it's benefiting them, that we are giving them the encouragement that they need. Okay, on to the next page. Well, maybe it is on mine, it might not be on yours. Behavioral guidelines for, oh yeah.
I'm sorry, what was the verse?
Ephesians 4:29.
How much different is the federal and state law than what you've got here? Maybe there things in that that are not in here?
What do you mean by that?
So it's as defined by federal and state law.
Oh, we took our behavioral guidelines from something that the insurance company gave us. And so that's just a generic phrase that they have in there that I think we didn't get out. This summer, one of the things that I'm going to be doing is looking at this and trying to make it a little bit more specific to our church and lose some of that generic language that's in there. But this is what we currently have.
I think it has to be that way to an extent, though, because the laws are continually evolving.
That's true.
And if we change our brochure every time the laws change, we'd be changing our brochure maybe 3 or 4 times a year. But this keeps us in compliance with state laws.
Thank you.
federal laws.
And I'm going to repeat that, Jim, just so that they know on the camera. Jim's response to that question was that we're keeping some generic in there so that if the state law changes, we don't have to reprint stuff every time the state law changes. Okay, all volunteer and paid staff will observe the following guidelines. Do not provide alcoholic beverages, tobacco, drugs, contraband, or anything that is prohibited by law to minors. To the extent possible, church events that are coeducational will have both male and female chaperones. Whenever possible, at least 2 unrelated paid staff or volunteers will be in the room when minors are present. Doors will be left fully open if one adult needs to leave the room temporarily and during arrival to the class or event before both adults are present. Speaking to a minor or minors one-on-one should be done in a public setting where paid staff or other volunteers are in sight of the other people. And I know this can sound kind of difficult, and we're not looking to put you in handcuffs in how you're interacting and when you're talking to kids. But again, we're trying to protect you. So just be mindful, because sometimes, especially in junior high, when you get to junior high and high school, the topics that you talk about are very sensitive and needs to be private. But you just have to be mindful of the fact that when you're taking those private discussions, there could be an allegation there. So if the discussion can be private and off, or you're still in a room with people, this is for your benefit and security and safety of the child, just as much as it is for the child. You know, we're in the church, and it's our job to love the children. But unfortunately, we live in a world where they're constantly throwing stones at the church. And so again, we have to protect ourselves based on the world that we live in, but we want to do what God wants us to do in honoring our kids. And it's a balancing act sometimes. Number 4, avoid all inappropriate touching of minors. All touching shall be based on the needs of the individual being touched, not on the needs of the volunteer or paid staff. In the event a minor initiates physical contact or inappropriate touching, it is appropriate to inform the minor that such touching is inappropriate. This is probably where we get the biggest questions. What is appropriate touching and what isn't? And a lot of that comes into knowing the developmental norms of the children. So when you're in the nursery, of course you're going to be carrying children. The children will want to sit on your lap. The children are going to come up and give you hugs. And we expect you to developmentally love them in the way that they need that. But the thing is that you have to, again, make sure that someone else is in the room, that they know that it's you and that it's okay. An example in case is just at the funeral that we had on Friday. There was a little boy who was a part of the family, and he was being disruptive, and I asked the family if I could take him in the nursery. Well, I was alone in the nursery with that child that day, so I kept the door open, and I never, other than picking him up to carry him out, I kept him to my side, I played next to him. I didn't allow what I might if I was in the room with another adult, because I had to protect my safety and the safety of that child. So then, therefore, I interacted just a little bit differently with him. But otherwise, you know, that's the age. That's what they like to do. And we want to love on them age appropriately. When you get into, like, children's church, when they're in the preschool age, some kids are still emotionally immature and they still need a lot of hugs and kisses. And they like that kind of stuff because that's just who they are. I tend to like to hug them when they're hugging my legs. So if you're standing up and they want to hug you and come wrap their arms around you, you can get down and give them a wonderful hug that makes them feel very secure, but you're keeping away any form of inappropriate behavior by doing that. If you happen to be sitting on the floor with them and they're a kid who kind of jumps into your lap, you know, then that's when you take the opportunity to just get the shoulder in there a little bit to block that front-on-front contact. Just get the shoulder in there, give them a little hug, invite them to come sit next to you. Because some kids just need that physical touch, and you can put your arm around them, and that's okay. We want to, you know, again, encourage normal development touch. When you get into the elementary school age, most of the time that should be done. Occasionally, probably more so in little girls and little boys, you still have a little girl who loves to be a hugger, and sometimes they never grow out of it, right, Jordan? Sorry. They're just huggy people. But again, that's when you need to kind of go to the side hugs, do lots of high fives, you know, the 10s, touching them on the shoulder. Oh, that's a good job, patting them on the back. Again, from a teenage standpoint, when you're in sports or something, sometimes you might pat your teammate on the rear end, and that's appropriate in that setting in your school environment. If that happens, that's probably more so with guys than girls. But just remember, when we're out playing and we're out doing our sporting events, that's a no-no here, okay? High fives, pats on the backs, that kind of thing. Any questions with that? Okay.
Since they're, even junior high or whatever, they're used to that in a sporting event, and if we get to extreme camp here, and we see that, should we do something to discourage it then?
Yes.
In this setting?
Yes, and so if you see that when you're out doing the events, whoever's leading the junior high extreme would then go up and say, hey, I understand if that's normal, but we try not to do that here. So if you please, we give them a couple of verbal cues, and then if they can't seem to remember, then we have to take it to the next step of maybe having them sit out for a game or something to really help them, or talking to their parent and saying, hey, we just don't allow this here. Okay? Any other questions? Okay. The other thing I wanted to talk about, especially again with the teens, but with adults too, is pottying the younger kids. It's really hard when children are potty training to know how to do this and get into a bathroom and not feel like, how can I get in trouble with this situation? So even in the nursery, when children are potty training, my recommendation is that we keep the door open. Kids at that age are not modest, so they don't really care. The job, if you're the one who's got to take a child into the bathroom, the other person who's in the nursery with you, it's their job to make sure the other kids aren't going to the door and peeking in. Okay, so that's your job, to distract and keep them away from that, so that both of you can stay safe, you both know what's happening. Even with potty training, unless they're having a BM, I would not recommend you ever wiping a child. Okay? If they have a BM where you know that they're going to go home smelling and mom and dad aren't going to be real happy with you, then you're going to have to assist the child. But otherwise, if they have a few tinkles that get in their underpants, we're not going to worry about that one. Okay, they can wipe as well as they can, and we'll move on. The same for children's church, because we have 2 doors that do not have windows in them for our bathrooms in there. Again, if the child wants to go into the room, let them go in by themselves, shut the door, but sometimes occasionally have a kid come walking out with their pants still down because they can't get them up. And again, don't push them back into the bathroom, don't make a big deal out of it, because you don't, again, want to seclude yourself in a private area. They don't care. If we don't make a big deal out of it, the other kids in the classroom aren't either. It's just, okay, let's get you zipped up and take care of it and move on with what we have to do next, okay? Any questions on that? And also when we're going into the public bathrooms, especially for sports camp, if you have to take a potty break with a child or two, one of the things that I'm going to ask who is ever on our the nursing staff, our first aid staff, is that when there's a bathroom break, that they'll be the second person in the bathroom, so that we have safety. Because having a group of kids go in there with you as an adult can still bring a charge against you. You really need that second adult in there with you, a second person who has gone through the training and is the volunteer. Okay. Yes.
What about, like, during Awana? What's the best way to handle that?
Awana, I'm going to have to speak a little bit more to the leaders and see how we can work that one out. So, but it's the same premise. You don't want to be in the bathroom alone with a child. So I would expect most of those kids are of an age where you could take them and stand at the door so you're not in the bathroom, let them use the restroom, and then come out. So if they don't have enough people to take to, that's going to be my recommendation for the Awana program.
But adults should always go.
Yeah, I'm just not fond of kids wandering around the halls, especially unless we have somebody who's always at the door so we know who's in and out of the building. That's a prime time for somebody to come in the building that we don't know. And then you let the child go to the bathroom, and then that person is in there waiting for that child. So for the safety of the child and the safety of the church, I would prefer that they be walked to the restroom and away with them. Any other questions?
Because me, I'm usually the only one in the room, and I have a bunch of little kids, so when...
And we're gonna be talking about it. Caleb's question is, he was in a room this year at the Wana. It was the games and the extra rooms, quite often by himself as the only person in there. So we're gonna have to just do our best to get more volunteers for Awana to continue to do those types of things for our kids and do it safely for your protection and for the protection of the
Like,
kids.
they like when they could go to the bathroom, like, meant to go with them, but then that would just say us kids.
Right, yeah, so if you would have to, yeah, and so again, it's just something we're gonna have to work out a little bit more. We've got a little time, thank goodness, to figure that one out. Any other questions?
In the nursery, do we need to ask the parents' permission to change the diaper? Or is that they're just assuming and we're just assuming that if there's an accident, we do it?
Yeah, good question, Joanne. Her question was, do we need to ask permission to change a diaper? No, I think when you're in a nursery, it's expected that if you see that the child needs a diaper change, that they need a diaper change. But we do not allow the teens to do diaper changes. So it does have to, when you're working with a teen in the nursery, the adult is the person who has to change the diaper. It's just, again, for the protection of you and the protection of the teen who's working with you and for the children. Any other questions? Good questions, you guys, thanks. Okay, number 5, never engage in physical discipline of a minor. Volunteers and paid staff shall not abuse minors in any way, including but not limited to physical abuse, verbal, mental abuse, emotional abuse, and sexual abuse of any kind. Now, there's many people who believe in spanking as a corrective measure at home. A little swat on the hand, something like that as a corrective measure. We're not here to tell you what you can or cannot do at home. That's your choice and for you to decide. But here at church, we cannot do that. If a child, unless a child is reaching for something dangerous that they are going to get hurt on, if they for some reason would be in the kitchen and going to be touching a hot stove because they accidentally wandered in, if you were cutting something and you forgot to put the scissors up and the child is reaching to grab the scissors on the sharp end where they're going to get hurt, that might be a cause for a quick grabbing or pushing down of the hand to protect the child. That's the only instance in which I could see that we would ever want to use any kind of a quick pat or getting out of the way, but the purpose in that is to protect the child. Otherwise, it's removing the child, timeouts. If that doesn't work, then you have to resort to going and asking their parents to come and get them and helping out with the situation. Any questions on that? This is the other part I had in there. You know, little kids are really good at figuring out what pushes our buttons too, especially when they get to know you. So if you ever do get frustrated in working with a child, because it can happen, little kids are just like adults. Sometimes we get along with them, and there are some little kids that, you know, I worked a lot of years as a speech pathologist, and there were some kids that I just really knew I wasn't going to make progress with real fast because our personalities didn't match. But if you have a kiddo who's pushing those buttons and you have to be in there, then take a break yourself. And we have the procedure for that. You tell your person that you're working with, you know what, I just need 2 minutes so I can come back in and be joyful and working for the Lord. I'm going to leave the door open, I'm going to stand right out here, but I need to recompose because this one's just pushed my buttons. And I need to be able to come in and love him in the way the Lord would like me to love him or her. So, does that make sense for everybody too? Okay, you have permission to do that. All right, number 6. If you recognize an inappropriate relationship developing between a minor and adult, maintain clear professional boundaries and refer the situation to Pastor John, to Pastor Tom, to myself, or anybody else in the pastoral or one of the elders so that we can handle the situation appropriately. If one-on-one pastoral care is necessary, avoid meeting in isolated environments. and anyone who observes abuse of a minor will take appropriate steps to immediately intervene and provide assistance. So if you would happen to see somebody with a child that you know is not theirs, and they might be spanking, jerking on an arm, they're frustrated, it is our job as a volunteer to go over, and you can easily say, boy, it looks like